All right, I think we are live. Lindsay, if we're not, please intervene and correct me, but I'm planning to get started. Uh, Today I want to talk about SEO metrics that your dashboard might be missing. Um, a little introduction first, however, I was just talking to Lindsay to kick things off here. So she does a lot of things on the growth side of the house for us, including like everything related to organizing and prepping and promoting these webinars. I am deeply grateful for that because all I have to do is put together a bunch of slides um, and that's really nice. So thank you, Lindsay. I like to introduce myself here at the beginning of these and talk a little bit about my background, just so you understand who is talking and why I might be qualified to talk about this subject. In particular for this one with the metrics, the blend of software engineering and then management consulting, that management consulting practice I actually used to spend a lot of time helping organizations um, create metrics. So that's me. I have this eclectic background that might help me speak to this subject. Hit subscribe in general to talk about SEO metrics. We've been doing this for a long time, driving a lot of traffic through search. We have a lot of analytics data. We built tooling out over above it. And again, my own background was just uniquely focused on like measuring hard to measure things in organizations. So I've built a lot of metrics and measurables over the years. What I'm going to talk about here, so I have a problem statement of sorts that maybe some of you can relate to when it comes to SEO metrics. I'm going to talk a little bit about types of metrics, but I won't make that overly wonky. It's just to establish a working taxonomy. I'll go through some metrics that are probably in your dashboard that are in most of the dashboards that I see and kind of offer our take on some of them. It runs the gamut. And then the meat of the webinar is really going to be metrics that we track that I don't think most people do, and why we would recommend those and why and how you might want to track them. And then a little bit at the end about like closing the loops and like what goes into having a good dashboard, if you will. So what I see a lot when it's SEO consultancies reporting on SEO metrics or dashboards or what have you is a lot of data without a lot of actionability. And there's a few threads of challenge here. So one is long feedback loops. I just took some graph of traffic from Ahrefs on the web, and apparently whoever did this in late 2023 said that they wanted to create organic traffic to the site, and then they actually did a pretty good job of that. You see a hockey stick graph happening here. The trouble is, if you're measuring traffic, which is the most common thing to measure, really what you're going to do is say, okay, we're going to spend 100K or whatever building out a traffic program, and then hopefully when we're measuring traffic in 2 years we did it. Otherwise, I mean, I'm really like understating the problem with my sad trombone quip here, but that's a real problem if you spend a lot of time and effort only to say in 2024 or 2025, gosh, why don't we have any traffic? That's a really long feedback loop, and that really burns political capital and credibility as you're endeavoring to do that and just hoping the results come through. There's also a lot of decontextualized data. So I see this in SEO reports all the time, like our average position in whatever dashboard this is apparently went from 32 to 34. I don't know what I would do with that information. Is that bad? I mean, that's a higher position. But then again, you're going from 0 visitors in that position to also 0 visitors. So does it matter? And then you would also look and say, like, what keywords are we even measuring? Is it stuff we put in 5 years ago and we've pivoted, we don't even target this anymore? So you get a lot of decontextualized data that isn't actionable. You're just reviewing it and asking, okay, what do I do with this? And if you're too focused on that, it can lead to like, angst you don't need or celebrating pointless wins. And then finally, there's a lot of outcomes that you don't control. So here is something I found in a screenshot of a like technical SEO dashboard. So there's 306 errors, and that seems bad, but at least it's not 500. And I guess if you get it down below 250, you're not in the red anymore. So cool. The 84 is in the green, so that's probably okay. The purple, so there's the decontextualization angle here. But then if you're in, say, enterprise SEO, all you're going to do is send this information over to the web team. What good does this do you if you can't even act on it? So there's generally a lot of data that doesn't have enough context, a lot of data that is really looking backwards instead of forwards. and a lot of data that maybe isn't even really meant for you or helpful for you. So with that in mind, let me talk a little bit about the nature of these metrics, and giving it this taxonomy here is going to help you understand maybe a little bit about the issues with typical dashboards. So a leading metric or a leading indicator, this is something that changes before the outcome you're looking for, and it signals intelligence about the future state. So for instance, if you create a lot of new URLs on your site that are targeting organic traffic, and then you observe that those URLs are having an ascending keyword trajectory, that is generally going to be a leading indicator of traffic later. So that those are leading metrics in that context. A lagging indicator or a lagging metric, on the other hand, is confirmation of results once reality plays out. And so this is mostly what your typical dashboards are made of, which is how many people are visiting the site, how many of them are converting or signing up. Those are lagging all of your SEO efforts. If you did everything right, they look good. If not, they don't look good. I should mention here as I roll through the rest of these definitions, these are not mutually exclusive. Things can be, usually they're not leading and lagging at the same time, but you can have something that's a composite metric that's leading or lagging. So this is more just meant to apply labels rather than bucket everything into one of these. A proxy metric is a stand-in for things that are difficult or impossible to measure. So the examples I've got here are domain authority and domain rating. Those are proprietary metrics from Moz and Ahrefs respectively. And what they're really trying to do is by proxy measure how much the search engine trusts your site, basically. Another thing you could think of as a proxy metric, this is an example, if you're out in like Silicon Valley, for instance, and everybody's putting up like billboards as like creative marketing for whatever they're doing. Hard to measure the impact of a billboard, but you could do something like say, let's measure the trend of branded searches before and after the billboard placement, and that difference might be a decent proxy metric for how much brand awareness the billboard is generating. A composite metric is something where you're taking a number of different measurements and combining them all together in a mathematical formula. So examples of this you're going to see everywhere in SEO tooling. It's what like an SEO health score is. It's a keyword opportunity score, your visibility index. All of those are composite metrics. They're taking a bunch of different data and transforming them into a kind of grade or a score. And then finally, first versus second order. This is really about control. So first order metrics, you're measuring things that are generally entirely within your control, like the number of URLs you publish on your website. Second order metrics are things that you have some input into, but you don't entirely control. So ranking, traffic, and conversions are examples of second order metrics. So with that in mind, I want to go through some of the metrics that you tend to see in SEO dashboards and kind of catalog what these are. And that'll help us identify some patterns here. Now, these are ones that we like. So in an SEO dashboard, you're going to see organic traffic, conversions, impressions, ideally URL level rankings. These are all things that make sense because at the end of the day, getting traffic onto your site and having that traffic convert is what you're after. So it is absolutely critical that you measure the thing that you're trying to do. I have no objection to that whatsoever. My hypothesis here is that these are good. We should just augment them with more things. URL level rankings, I do want to be clear that I really like URL level rankings when it comes to keywords. Not as much holistic site level rankings, and I'll get into that a little more later. But leads, traffic trends, all of these are good. But notice that all of these are lagging and second order metrics. You don't control any of these things. So that's going to become a theme. There's nothing in here in most of these dashboards that is a first order metric that you control. So metrics that are fine, these are, I have no objection to them being in dashboards, but they can get a little iffy in some situations. Domain rating and domain authority, for instance, I think it's worth keeping track of these. These are good proxy metrics for things that are important to you. The only reason I'm a little iffy on them at times is people get over-indexed on them and treat them as first-class goals. And because they're proxy metrics, that's not what you're trying to do. It's worth bearing that in mind. Backlinks and refers, this is interesting. If you're going out and placing backlinks, that's a first order metric. You can control that. If you're relying on your on-site activities to naturally earn them, then it's a second order metric. Um, this is also fine to keep track of, but again, you can get over-indexed and create some weird incentives here. So be careful, especially if you find yourself going down a toxic backlinking rabbit hole, comment spam, or whatever the case may be. Things like average position and index or visibility index as measured by SEO tools can be okay. I think that there's a lot of situations where you don't curate them enough, so you wind up with a garbage in, garbage out situation. But if you're active about curating them, these are decent metrics to have. There are some here that I think are fine situationally, but I wouldn't just put them on your dashboard without any context. A good example of this is engagement metrics. If you're just monitoring the bounce rate on average across all of your URLs, I don't really endorse that. You would really want to be looking at that through the lens of, okay, what sort of engagement rate would I expect on a particular type of content versus another kind of content? So like rolling it up broadly, I don't think is helpful. I would leverage engagement metrics when you have a hypothesis that something might be off and you want to drill into that. Broader global click-through rate. This isn't the most helpful thing because, again, averaging it out, there are different pages where you would expect different click-through rates, just depending on things going on in the search results. So normalizing or aggregating that can really lose signal. Um, Site performance, I am leery of, but for a different reason. I think there's kind of a floor in our experience where bad site performance will hurt you. But above a certain threshold where your site performance is fine, there tend to be heavily diminishing returns in paying a web firm to like overhaul your website and incur all the risk and headache and all that just to chase really marginal gains is not something I would do. And I have definitely over the years seen a lot of people obsess about site performance, and it's just a waste. So be careful with that one. And then finally, things like AI or featured snippets, like targeting widgets. That's okay if that's your goal. If you're saying, let's get into the, a citation in the AI widget or something like that. If you're just broadly measuring that when you're not trying to do that, this is not going to be informative. So these are situational ones. Lastly, these are ones where I'd say be careful. SEO health roll-up scores, I see a lot of what I would think of as not the best weighting. So if you have a million URLs on your site and you don't care about 990,000 of them because they're programmatically generated or something, an SEO tool that flags 990,000, you don't have the right meta errors and calls your health poor, that's not really a good read on your situation. So these tools tend to be opaque and overweight minutia, and they can really skew in unproductive directions if you're not careful. Average rank, I also don't really like this. The reason is, imagine a situation where you have 3 URLs on your site, 2 you care about and you're targeting a keyword and they're ranking number 1, 1 you don't care about and you're ranking number 100. You're going to have an average rank of 33. That's not really reflective of the situation. So average is not really the right way to think about this, in my opinion. Things like opportunity scores and where you get into SEO tools giving you proprietary scores where they don't reveal their methodology, I'm leery of. If you really trust the tool, then maybe go with it. But I don't necessarily like that because the methodology is opaque and often it's aimed at gamifying. And there is a natural incentive where these tools are often sold to SEO consultants who are going to come in, and it's in their best interest if there's a lot of things that are gamifying you and they're recommending that you pay them to do billable things to make the score go up. So I don't mean to sound conspiracy theory oriented or anything like that, but I do look at incentives of things, and that has a weird set of incentives. Toxic links is another one I've seen. This is, I think, unique to SEMrush. I think that this historically overstates risk. When you have false positives, it's an issue. You're chasing things that don't matter. I think Google has taken the position that this isn't a thing. So this is one where if you've got it and you're worried about it, you may be spending good after bad to try to chase down things that don't matter. And then finally, traffic versus competitor and things like this, where you're relying on estimates of your competitors' traffic, conversions, whatever the case may be. I don't like this simply because these tools are taking wild guesses and you're, building on top of those wild guesses. So if Ahrefs thinks that your competitor has such and such traffic, and you're basing your approach on trying to overtake them, you don't even know that you're chasing an even remotely realistic figure. And I say that as somebody who sees SEO tool estimates and then the reality of lots and lots and lots of properties. It's directionally correct when you see these tools. If your traffic is increasing, they'll probably get that right, but it can be off by an order of magnitude in terms of gross traffic. Generally, conclusions in terms of what I see in dashboards, they rarely feature first order metrics. So this is a blind spot. Typically, you're not tracking your activities typically in these, you're just tracking the resulting. They tend to over index on long-term results rather than shorter term things that you can control and tune as you go. They're often featuring what I was just talking about, gamified metrics. So like psychologically, they're like atavistically taking you back to childhood where you were getting graded out of 100% and they give you an 80 and you're thinking, oh, that's a B minus, I need to get to A. I'm a little leery of that, especially if the way you get to an A is to pay a consulting firm to get you there. And then crucially for the rest of the presentation, they rarely close the loop of here's what we expect to happen, here's what is actually happening, here is the gap. So I'm going to pause right there for a breather. I should have mentioned this ahead of time that I'd have a few like interludes for questions if anybody has them. Otherwise, I'll continue on. If you do have questions, incidentally, I don't see anybody telling me there's active questions. You can also drop them in the chat or what have you to Lindsay, who can aggregate them as well. So getting to the meat of things here, this is the metrics that we track that in my experience most don't. I can't say that nobody ever tracks them anywhere. Maybe like high-end enterprise SEO tooling is tracking some of these, but I don't see them come up a lot generally. Before I dive in though, I want to say a couple things here. Ideally, I'm going to go through a bunch of metrics, and if you like them or you agree with the reasoning, then absolutely add them to your dashboard if you can, if you have data, the tooling, and such. But the important thing is whether or not you actually add them as a widget in your Looker dashboard or what have you. The important thing would be able to add them. So gathering and tracking the data, even if you don't put it into a dashboard, it's a valuable exercise to know that you could. That's really the big thing that I would endorse, is having the data, having access to it, and understanding how to interpret it. Everything I'm going to present here is stuff that we, with our Osiris tooling, and before that, just with our methodology, we would be able to measure. Some of it we actually do put up, and I'll have screenshots. Some of it, if you told me you wanted a screenshot or a dashboard of it, it would be easy to put in there. Either way, we have the capability, so I'm practicing what I preach. And I'll admit that some of these, especially ones that I'll get into in the latter, where you're biasing toward action, are a little bit hard to DIY without some infrastructure or experience in building metrics. But we could always advise on that if you have questions. So first and foremost, what's missing here, I've teased this throughout, but I would suggest that you load up on first order metrics because that's typically missing. I'm going to go through these slides. I'm not going to read all of the slides off to you as I go through them. I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about the metrics holistically, but each of these slides, and we'll distribute the deck after the fact, explains the metric. It gives it a taxonomy as to kind of what class or classes of metric it is. We talk about why this is important, how to measure it, and then limitations. I won't exhaustively read all of those, but just know that you have access to it. First, new URLs produced. This is going to be the main leading indicator of your eventual traffic to the site. There's no doubt about it. This is the most powerful tool in your arsenal for driving a lot of traffic, is to go out and identify a keyword, or these days, if we're broadening search visibility, our methodology generally is to map a keyword to a question that somebody's asking. That plays nicely in the GEO world, where a prompt is also basically a question somebody is asking. So in general, identify a question somebody is asking, create a URL that is designed to answer that question. That is the thing that will holistically drive the most traffic. So it is worth measuring how much of that you're doing, both because you're going to be able to use that to reason about how much traffic you think you ought to have later, and also to kind of incent, production of new URLs. So you're almost creating a to-do list or a goal for yourself, like we should produce 100 new URLs this year. How many have we actually produced? This is generally, I think, very important to do, and it's often missing. The reason this is so important is you get these first order metrics in your dashboard, and it's going to allow you, if in 2 years, like in that result from early in the presentation, you don't have any traffic, if you're documenting your first orders and your intentional things, you will easily be able to look and troubleshoot and say, is it that we didn't do enough effort, or is it that our methodology was flawed? Because if you're looking back in 2 years and you only produced 5 URLs when you set out to produce 100, you can't really reason about the methodology. You didn't put in the work. If, on the other hand, you produced all 100 and it didn't work, something is off about the methodology. And that's a lot easier if you're differentiating from the beginning. So you want to measure the number of URLs that you are producing. And one thing I will say about this, and also existing URLs optimized, which is the next one, I would document these in some fashion that is kind of manual. We do this in Airtable with our inventory methodology. The reason I say this is because the natural thing you're going to think is, well, I can just look in the CMS and have this data. Not really. Somebody will come along and install a plugin that automatically updates the pub date every time somebody touches it, and suddenly that data is gone into the ether. Your CMS on a long timeline will lie about dates. Your documentation will not. So I would document how many URLs or the rate at which you are producing URLs. I would likewise document the rate at or number of existing URLs that you are re-optimizing. With re-optimizing, what you're doing is really measuring the degree to which you're undertaking activities or investing in protecting your existing traffic. When you produce content, it will gradually ascend and then level off and eventually decline. Re-optimizing the URLs is aimed at blunting the curve of that decline, slowing the rate of decline. So when you are doing these activities, you are making an effort to retain existing traffic. Intervention rate per URL is also something that I would capture in some format. So the rate of URLs intervened, this is how many existing blog posts have I touched. The intervention rate per URL is how many things did I do, and or what are the nature of these things that I did. So this is, how many URLs versus how much to each URL. Capturing both of these is going to allow you to reason about and evaluate the tactics that you're undertaking. So if you're going into all of your URLs and you're just changing the pub date, for instance, that's probably not going to help. Actually, don't do that. That would hurt you. But from just a tracking perspective, you're doing only like one thing and it's a minor thing to each URL. You really want to be, maybe doing more than that. So if you were to do that, see that you had no results and you were saying, oh, well, we're only really doing one thing per URL. What would happen if we did 10? That's the reason that you want to be tracking kind of the volume of change per URL. Another thing that I would absolutely track is the sitemap 200 rate. So the sitemap, if you don't know, this is something that you submit to the search engine and you say, here is essentially a list of the URLs that I want you to show in search. 200 is the HTTP status code that means everything is good at this URL, for lack of a better way of putting it. If you are submitting a bunch of URLs to the search engines that return redirects or they return error codes or what have you, that's going to be poor SEO hygiene. This is a very good way of cleaning up in high leverage fashion your SEO hygiene. So if you were to come to me and say our site is underperforming, this is absolutely one of the first things I would look at, is to get a read on the technical SEO. I would definitely have the ability to track this and check in on it periodically, just to make sure that you're not building up a lot of SEO tech debt, let's call it. So this is an easy thing to do. It's generally prophylactic in nature, and it can help you. You want to keep this rate up near 100, if not 100. Cannibalization rate is another thing that I would recommend tracking in some fashion, especially if you're worried about it. So if you're watching and you have, the education or the learn section of your site, and product marketing is producing content on the blog section of your site, situations where you don't control all of the content, this is more of a worry. Cannibalization is basically the idea that the search engines are only going to want to show one URL for a given domain in the search results. If you target a term over and over again, at best, the search engine is going to ignore some of your URLs. At worst, it will distribute the authority across them and none of them will rank. If you are tracking cannibalization potential, let's call it, you can head that off earlier than later. And the way you're going to measure this is basically you're going to look for instances where you have multiple URLs that are sharing impressions for the same keywords. So if you were going to instrument for this, you would be heavily in Google Search Console for this one. I will say on the limitations front for this one, this is fairly labor intensive to set up and difficult. And you have to have some care at which you set the threshold. It wouldn't be abnormal for you to have a URL that was getting 95% of the impressions for a keyword, a couple others get a few here and there. That's not going to be cannibalization. 50-50 split, probably cannibalization. So there is some nuance to this whole thing. But the reason I like this one, if you can get this data, is that there is a real Gordian knot thing that happens here. If you cannibalize, once you get into decannibalize mode, that is extremely labor intensive and difficult. It's a knot. It's better never to tie the knot in the first place. So any early read you can get that you're tying this knot is excellent early warning. Important to own target rate. So again, this is a question of effort. You're going to build out a backlog of keywords and you're going to say that these are important to own, or these days you might build out a backlog of prompts and say that they're important to own. All we're really identifying here is the rate at which you've done something about that. So this is going to be a metric that grows up towards ideally 100% once you've crossed everything off of the backlog. But if you want to rank for some keyword and you've never ranked for that, or you've never made an attempt to rank for that keyword, then all of the stuff like keyword tracking and visibility index is kind of skewed because you wouldn't really expect to rank for something you haven't tried to rank for. So this is important at just, answering the question, how much here have we actually attempted right out of the gate? And I don't know if I mentioned this before, so I'm including a lot of screenshots for how we're tracking this in Osiris. So for instance, this is a view that we have of important to own. All of these screenshots are on a publicly available dummy site that we own, so it's like demo stuff. And what you're really seeing in here is in this site, hypothetically, we have 4 important to own keywords that we've targeted and 1 here that we haven't. So there's an 80% rate of targeting important to own keywords. This one is in the day and age of the GEO and looking at what answer engines are saying about you. This is unique to this. I'm calling this the value prop articulation rate. So these days, everybody is kind of adjusting their position to, accommodate and speak to the AI landscape. So you go to landing page after landing or homepage after homepage, and you see, we're doing whatever it is with AI. Ironically, as you're trying to show up in answer engines, the old-fashioned stuff of, we just do this old boring thing for this group of people is going to get a lot of play in the answer engines. They're just looking for a straightforward, we help this kind of company with this kind of thing. So what I'm really getting at here is if you're thinking about what kind of conversations do I want to show up, or what kind of prompts do I want to show up for when people are asking, you need stuff on your site that is saying, yeah, we do that. So here we're really just talking about whether you're creating standalone landing pages or just chunks within a page where you're talking about what you do. How many of the things that you actually want the answer engines to talk about you for have you put onto your site? And then another one under this category is CTA instrumentation rate. What I'm getting at here is this is the rate at which, if you take, especially URLs that are earning traffic through organic, or at least intending to, you figure you're going to get some amount of traffic to that. You should also be thinking about what do you want that traffic to do. So have you, put something at the footer or interstitially that says try our demo or whatever. This is the rate at which you've actually thought through that and made a decision and acted on that. Now, if you have a section of your site that is really just about brand awareness and you don't want any traditional CTAs, that's fine. You're intentionally saying we don't want to do that. What I'm getting at here is the intentionality. How many of the URLs where you're targeting search have you done this exercise for? So the next set of metrics here that I'm going to go through is less about the effort and first order type of stuff. And this is getting into more of the segment where we're setting expectation via hypothesis. So we want to be measuring the things that we control, the leading indicators of future success, but we also want to be documenting what we think is going to happen when we're actually going forward with some campaigns. The first one here is average traffic per URL. Now, this is a bizarre place to start because it sounds like classic second order lagging indicator type stuff. We've created a bunch of content, and how are we doing? The thing is, the reason that I'm including this here is one of the first things that I do when somebody asks us to model future state of a site is we'll ask the question, well, how have you done historically? So here we're taking the top performing, say 30 or 50 URLs, and we're averaging the traffic to those in the last 30 days. And interestingly, this serves as a really good stand-in for predicting future performance. If the top 30 URLs on your site average out to 250 visitors per month, it's reasonable to do some modeling where you say, okay, when we're producing URLs in the future, it's reasonable to assume that we can pencil in about 250 visitors per month for that URL. So calculating this and having it available to you on an ongoing basis is a really good way to help you set expectations for future production of URLs. Another thing in the sort of like hypothesize and management category is lead time to index. What this means is you hit publish on something, and then there's some delay that happens. Google and these days other crawlers are going to pick it up, see that there's new stuff on your site, probably by crawling your sitemap, and then they're going to at some point index it. The question here is how long does that take? If it takes a day, that's pretty good. If it takes a week, that's too long. That really adds up and compounds because the sooner it's indexed, the sooner it ranks, the sooner the traffic. So if you're incurring unnecessary delays ahead of that, you want to remediate that as soon as possible. This is a strong leading indicator for future ranking and traffic. And usually if it's taking a week, you might be doing something from a technical SEO perspective that's an issue, not putting things in your sitemap, not even having a sitemap. So measuring this and keeping an eye on it can be good for ensuring that you're set up for success. And if it elongates at some point, that there might be something wrong. So I would measure that. I would also be measuring something called time to thrash. Now, what I mean by this is there are life cycles around published URLs. You hit publish, the first thing that happens is the search engines pick it up and index it. The next thing that happens, if everything is going well, is after some time, maybe a week, 2, 3, it's going to depend on your site age and a number of factors. It will start to rank it within the top 100 for keywords that you're targeting. Now, what will happen is it's not like a nice neat curve from 100 all the way up to position 1. It is going to rank you in position 80 on one day, then 12 the next day, then position 95, then position 50, then you're not even in the top 100. This is called thrashing. What we want to do, it won't really result in much of any traffic in the early going, but we want to see that that's happening because that's on the happy path towards ranking. It's a leading indicator of ranking and traffic. The lead time to traffic, this is kind of the third step here, the third phase in the life cycle. Here you have steady traffic. So what you're looking at in this screenshot is our toy site, Make Me a Programmer. This is a view that takes all of the URLs and their publish date and it normalizes them. So it's not calendar you're looking at here. You're looking at what was the traffic on average to these URLs in week 1, 2, 3, etc. And what this holistically shapes up with is fairly interesting and actionable. It suggests that you're in this gaining pattern, and then I'm not sure what goes on with these URLs here. That's a little weird, but generally the shape of this curve is what you would expect, which is gradual thrashing and then traffic and then eventual peak and decline. We're seeing here that maybe around the 6-month mark, that's when we're at what I think of as the traffic phase. This is when you have reliable traffic to these URLs. So we want to get a read on what that is, both in terms of setting expectations and future projections. So if you think about this now, we can, in projecting out future traffic, we're saying, okay, we have a pretty good sense of how long it takes to rank. We have a pretty good sense based on the average traffic per URL of what traffic we can expect when it does rank. This is going to let us model out our future efforts here pretty well, at least based on historical data. It's also good from a tuning and actionability perspective. If you have established your time to rank and you see URLs that are not doing that, then you're not speculating anymore. It's been 6 months, there's no traffic, this is underperforming, what should we do? Another thing that we have built out over the years is methodology for expected rank. And what I did some years back is a best fit curve over historical client data across a number of different sites with different domain authorities and different uh, ages and so on. And the idea is just to build out something that sets an expectation for the winnability of a keyword. You could do something crudely as simple as saying, okay, well, if it's a 30 difficulty in Ahrefs, we should, or below, we'll probably rank. So let's say we expect to rank 5 for those. If it's above 30, we expect to rank 20. That's not the best formula, but it's something. Forming a hypothesis about where, based on your site and the keyword's difficulty, you expect to rank is helpful for anchoring expectations and then later measuring against those expectations. So expected rank is something I would establish. The limitations here are important to call out because it's really going to depend on your model and how much fidelity there is there. It's also crucially an educated guess. It's not some kind of oracle, but this does allow you to set some expectations to evaluate against later. Same thing with traffic. We set expectations for traffic. A lot of times using the methodologies I just alluded to is like, what have you done historically in terms of traffic? How long does it take to rank? So you can feed that back in, set expectations, and then keep track of those as you go. And I'll get into in more detail here in a bit, the idea of closing the loop against these hypotheses. So at this point, are there any questions? I will say everything that I've covered so far is metrics and things to think about before results start rolling in. The next set of this is going to be, okay, results are coming in. What actions do we take? And how do we close the loop? So let me know, Lindsay, if I have any questions at this point or anybody.
No, not currently.
All right, I'm going to roll on in that case. So the next set of metrics that I'm going to talk about here are things that we've developed over the years that are really aimed at helping with decision making. So where I had talked about in the early going a lot of metrics, that's like we've gone from here and here in terms of average rank, and your question is, okay, what do I do? These are composite metrics that we have really built out to help you make decisions. So you're looking at this and not thinking, what do I do? It's clear what you might want to do. The first one here is a refreshability score. What this is, and you're looking at a screenshot of it sorted, the score in this case is potential traffic gain. We are creating and have created a composite metric here that factors in the last time you made a change to the URL, what kind of traffic we expect, so the traffic potential to the URL, what kind of actual traffic you had over the course of time, is the traffic declining, have you had really high peak months and then these days it's really low. Factoring all of that in, we create a force ranking that says, in order, here are the URLs that you ought to consider re-optimizing and refreshing. So this is very much a composite metric. It's very much a lagging metric based on historical performance, but crucially, it is a highly actionable metric, and that is really the intent. The limitations and how to measure here, this is where it gets a little bit difficult to DIY. You could build a metric of this nature for yourself. You could build a metric or a model for this yourself. It would be a little bit involved. We have a lot of reps at doing this, so it's easier for us to do. The other thing is, if you have tooling that is doing, or you build one, these composite metrics are only as good as their internal logic. So if you have sort of flawed logic for what makes something refreshable, then this is not going to be super valuable, obviously. And the way to address that really is as you go along, you should kind of validate based on your own set of knowledge historically. Like, okay, the model is saying I should refresh this. Does that pass the smell test? So you should always be open to tuning and refining your models. Incidentally, something I'll say that we do that a lot of tools might not do with like opaque domain authority, proprietary scores or whatever. If you are a client of ours and you want to know how I'm computing these things, I will 100% open source the formulas. There's no opacity here. Retireability score, this is another one that we like to have. And the idea here is over the course of time, you're going to publish like changelog announcements that have no relevance these days, 3 pivots later, that you started building this feature in 2021 that you abandoned in 2023. There are going to be indexed URLs on your site. and URLs in your sitemap that over the course of time you don't have a lot of use for. The retireability score is taking into account, like, do you have any backlinks to this URL? Are there any visitors in the last 30 days, etc.? And it basically force ranks and sorts the likelihood by which you could just unpublish something and be fine. And this is really designed to help during like spring cleanings or technical SEO cleanups. You're starting really ahead of the game. Here are the URLs to first contemplate getting rid of. This is pretty helpful. And again, is a bias towards action. Preservability score, this is another similar one, and this one can be a little bit more situational, but you're generally getting a score of how much a URL is worth preserving, and that, let's call this SEO value. So you have backlinks, you have traffic, you have impressions. The degree to which you have those things informs the degree to which this matters, because the search engines, or these days the answer engines, consider it helpful to them. And that's really an important distinction, because you might look at this and say, like, well, you know, something way at the bottom of preservability, like that you might consider retiring. You might say, well, I really like this, and this is a valuable URL. I'm going to distribute it. This is important to have. Likewise, something with a high preservability score, maybe in this case, I'm saying, I don't care about the best way to learn C# anymore. Get rid of this. If I have a lot of backlinks to it, if the search engine has been using it and serving it up for a long time, their response would be, hey, not so fast, I like that. And I'm not going to like it if you get rid of it. So the preservability score can serve to give you a heads up that even if you're thinking about retiring something, you may want to reconsider and just, make it less accessible from your nav structure. This is especially useful if you're doing migrations or site overhauls or things of that nature, because there it's going to be a sorted list of what you probably want to QA from the perspective of, did it make the transition? Another thing that we're looking at is possibly wounded URLs. So this is a composite metric of URLs that have regularly received traffic on a steady basis, but then their traffic has dropped to zero recently. Usually you're going to see that if somebody unpublished something, or if there's a technical showstopper related to the URL. So this can be really an early alert kind of system for problems, so that you're not saying, whoa, half of our traffic went away from October to November. Why did that happen? You start to dig in and you figure out that somebody unpublished a dozen URLs. You would rather know about that sooner than later. Steep drop-offs. This is similar, but it's not dropping to zero. Instead, it's a URL that regularly receives traffic, but has dropped to like 25% or lower of what it normally gets. This is also good for early warning. These that are particular or purely analytics, composite and analytics, you could probably recreate with a Google Analytics 4 exploration. Maybe Google Search Console would let you do something like this. Given that we are importing data into BigQuery and able to query on it, we're just building out our own infrastructure for this. So I don't admittedly know how you might do this in tooling. My gut says you would be able to recreate this. With these, if you're going to create data-based warnings, you should just be aware that you're going to have to do some tuning, because you'll encounter a lot of false positives and negatives right out of the gate. So, for instance, in this screenshot, I set the days since last visit threshold to be 2. The problem with that is, quite probably, if I was capturing the screenshot on a Monday, it's just that it was the weekend. There's nothing to worry about here. So you really do need to tune these alerting metrics accordingly. But the through line here with all of these particular metrics is you are trying to create composite metrics in your dashboard that are suggesting action rather than acontextual data. What you really want, ideally, with this sort of metric and scoring, is to be looking at things and saying, there is a decent chance that I might want to take action. I'm going to sanity check that, and then I'm going to move along with that action. The last one in this category, traffic trend. This is basically what you're looking at here. Here's like, traffic over the course of time. It's going to be sort of up and down and noisy. You just draw a linear trend line through that traffic, and that can really help you evaluate whether a URL or groups of URLs or your whole site is trending up or down over the course of time. And if you were to compute the slope of this line, that can tell you the degree to which that is happening. And that can be pretty powerful, assuming you're picking a good time window. So I wouldn't pick a time window of like 4 days, because again, it's always going to be starkly down on Monday and starkly up on Thursday. So you have to be sensitive to picking the right window of time. For instance, we use trend lines a lot in looking at URLs that you might want to do something about, to say, like, if something's been trending down steadily for 6 months, it's losing traffic. We should take a look at this and say, do we want to do something or not? So this can be really handy to do, and it's not conceptually all that difficult. These days, you can ask ChatGPT or something to give you a regression formula. It's pretty straightforward to do, and you might be able to build this right in GA4. So finally here, those are all metrics and things to put in your dashboard that are going to inform action. These are things where we're going to circle back and close the loop against our hypotheses. So one of the things that we're going to do here is, we had talked about projecting rank earlier on. If you're projecting rank, then it's natural to close the loop and measure actual ranking, and then to also measure the difference between those. So here, what you're looking at in this Toy Make Me a Programmer dashboard is a heat map of how we're doing against expectations. So in here, if we're saying, that we're projecting position 10 and we're ranking in position 10, that would actually be green, because even though our expectations are low, we are hitting those expectations. So when you're looking at this colored map, it's a really interesting visual about, are we underperforming here? Are we overperforming? How are we doing against our expectations? With Make Me a Programmer, it's not surprising that we're underperforming, because you're seeing dates that we've last touched these things in 2021. It's a solid 5 years of traffic decay. So seeing a lot of yellow, red, and angry red here makes sense. But if we were regularly maintaining all of these URLs, then this graph would worry me. It is worth calling out here that if you are using composite metrics to inform this, if you're underperforming, there are two questions you need to ask. One is, maybe, why are we underperforming? But the other is the model off? If we've created a model and everyone's underperforming all the time, we should probably adjust the model. So that does introduce a little bit of nuance, but if you feel pretty good about your model, if it's been battle tested, then you can start to say, hey, I think that this is probably serial underperformance. What should we do about it, if anything? Similarly here, we're talking about rank traffic against projections. You're projecting rank, you're recording actual rank in the same way. We should project traffic and record our actual traffic. Then that's also going to let us make determinations about where and how we might intervene. This is another one that we've built out. So this is one of my favorite screens here that we have. So if we are executing a refresh on a bit of content, the idea is you're going to be executing refreshes, or you're going to be doing maintenance on content. Often that content will be in sort of a declining posture. If you go and you make changes, what we're ideally hoping for is that you reverse that decline for a while, you get some lift. If nothing else, you would at least want the decline to get slower. But in order to really assess that, you're going to need to take a look at the time before and the traffic to the URL, and then the same amount of time afterwards. I have a slider in here that you can drag to fairly easily assess different time windows. You wouldn't really want to assess like 1 or 2 days. It's not enough of a sample size. But at any rate, whatever you're doing here, this is a rolling way to be consistently saying, hey, we're going in and we're spending time, effort, money, actually making changes to these URLs. Is it doing anything for us? That is really important to look at. So in this case, this is the Make Me a Programmer site. We got outsized results here. The sample size is a little small. What I'm getting at is, if you come to us and ask for this, don't expect a 200% traffic increase. That's not a common result. But what you would typically want to see in here, just from what we've seen over the course of time, if you're in the window of like 5 to 20%, that's pretty good. Above 20%, you're getting great returns. But if you're below 5%, or it's still declining, then you might want to hit timeout and say, are we doing this right? Or maybe the problem domain is just becoming less interesting to searchers. We're going to stop and do something else with our resources. But you can't do any of that unless you're tracking impact as a composite metric here. Similarly to traffic and to ranking, you can reason about conversions up front and then track conversions against your expectations. There's going to be more variables the further down the funnel you get, but it's still a valuable exercise to feed back into, do we adjust the model or do we adjust our tactics? And then traffic or conversions per campaign. This is a little bit different. What you're looking at is a view of Make Me a Programmer, and it's a little hard to see in this screenshot, but you're looking at the traffic over time segmented by the type of content that's being created. So here, what we're looking at is definition posts, roundup posts, and guide posts. And you can draw some interesting conclusions. Number one, the definition posts are really declining, and the roundup posts are kind of sustaining. And then this small set of guide posts also seem to be sustaining. That actually tracks with the time window here where AI search widgets and such have really just wiped out definition type content. All of this only really works if you're grouping or tagging your URLs inventory wise and then evaluating how they're doing. I do believe you can execute this with something called content groups in Google Analytics 4. I don't know. I wouldn't get into the weeds of that tool. It is not my favorite. But I think that this is doable. And I would certainly recommend doing this is evaluating different groups of URLs on your site for triage and also to feed back into future decisions. So if I'm looking at this graph on Make Me a Programmer, I probably want to stop writing definitions, and I probably want to write more and more roundups and guides. And then there's a similar kind of thing that I would suggest doing here with like categories. So Make Me a Programmer is a more trivial site in this fashion, but we are looking here at the traffic over time to the landing pages and to the blog section of the site. If you are measuring, whether it's learn or glossary or guest tutorials or whatever, if you have different like tags and categories on your site, you might want to also group those so that you can evaluate them against each other, close the loop on which campaigns or which sections of your site are working and which aren't, and in what channels. Definitely a big fan of that. And then that is it on the metrics. So a long run through the metrics. Any questions that we've captured at this point in time?
No.
All right, and then I will conclude here with some general advice on closing the loop. So here's what I would do from a dashboard perspective, and I would work things into the dashboard according to this general methodology. Define hypotheses before you execute them, and then have ways in your dashboard of making those visible. Start measuring continuously, ideally from day zero. So you've got these hypotheses, we want to earn traffic or whatever it is. Measure the earlier the better against everything that you're doing. Define explicit outcomes. So succeed, fail, and bail is a turn of phrase I like here. And what I mean by that is, what does success look like for a URL after 6 months or a year? So when do we call something a success? Likewise, when do we call it a failure? And then if it's really failing or if things are getting really off the rails, at what point do we bail out and say, okay, like this is not worth pursuing? Maybe it's not finished. We don't have a lot of data, but it's going really badly. It's a lot easier to define these things initially than it is to say like, okay, we're a year into this organic thing, it doesn't seem to be going well. Should we pull the plug? You've got some cost to deal with and all that. As you're going, and certainly after the fact, you want to be comparing results to expectations. And then you want to be using all of that to adjust your behavior accordingly, and if necessary, adjusting your modeling. And what we've been doing with Osiris and all of the screenshots and things that we're bringing to bear and presenting this is trying to help people make steps 2 through 5 not overwhelming. And we've been building this by dog fooding for a number of years. So when it comes to ROI reasoning and where Osiris or what we do and do well fits in here in general is expectation modeling we're good at. If you're saying like, well, sure, I'd love to set expectations for what our organic campaign should produce, but I don't know how to do that. That's something we do well. Measurement, we also do well because of all this experience bringing in and blending the data together. We're very used to measuring all these things. The variance detection piece is something we built up some chops for over the years. Decision support, I think this is the thing maybe that I'm the most proud of with our composite metrics, is creating these actionable things that you can just look at and say, okay, here are some recommendations of what I should do. And then finally, building out custom metrics. So to create something like a refreshability score in the first place is something that we have experience doing. So here at the hour, or pretty close to it anyway, a couple things. Osiris, our offering, used to be a beta offering. It is now in general release. So we've got a link here to it and a proper landing page. Also, thanks to Lindsay for that. I think I started doing something and committed a few UX war crimes in our site and then abandoned it. And Lindsay actually created a nice looking page on our site, which I'm grateful for. And then I'll say also, just if you're attending or listening to this webinar and you want some help building out composite metrics or something like that, what we can do is we always do client analytics access under NDA. We get NDA, you can give us some access. And if you're saying, here are some metrics I want to build, we can just help you build those. That's good for us to sort of sharpen the edge of our skills. And I think it's interesting to do. So just let us know if that's of interest and we can talk about that. And that's it. That's all I've got. Any questions here at the end about anything?
No, I think we can go ahead and wrap up.
All right. Well, I appreciate everybody, your time and attention for attending live, certainly, and anybody that's watching this after the fact, thanks to you as well. And hopefully this has been interesting. We're going to keep rolling along with this series. I think we're queuing up something for next time about how to talk to leadership about GEO is a tentative working title. So if that interests you also, let us know. And if not sooner, I will catch you next time.